On July 25, 1943, Benito Mussolini was stripped of power, not by a revolution, but by his own inner circle. The Grand Council turned on him. The king gave the order. No shots were fired. No crowds rose up. Just silence, and then an arrest. He was taken away in secret, moved from place to place, isolated, forgotten, until Hitler sent a rescue squad to drag him back into a war he had already lost. A fake government was set up in the north. The South backed the Allies. What followed wasn't just occupation, it was civil war. Partisans rose. Blood was spilled. Mussolini was no longer feared, just hunted. In the end, there was no courtroom, no final speech, only a bullet, and a body hung for all to see, but his shadow never left. What really happened in Mussolini's last days? And why do they still haunt Italy? How Mussolini rose. Blood, myths, and power. Benito Mussolini was born in 1883 in a small village in northern Italy called Dovia di Predappio. His father was a blacksmith and a socialist. His mother was a devout schoolteacher. From an early age, Mussolini grew up with strong and conflicting influences. Political rebellion on one side, discipline and education on the other. He was a difficult child, smart but angry. At school, he carried a knife and often got into fights. He was expelled more than once. But he read a lot. He read Marx, Nietzsche, and revolutionary writers. By the time he was in his early 20s, he had become a fiery socialist speaker, known for his temper and powerful voice. Before the First World War, Mussolini had risen through the ranks of Italy's Socialist Party. He edited the party's newspaper, Avanti, and gained a loyal following. But in 1914, when the war broke out in Europe, Mussolini made a sharp turn. While most socialists opposed the war, he supported it. He called for Italy to join the fight. That stance got him kicked out of the party. From there, everything changed. He created his own newspaper, Il Popolo d'Italia, where he started pushing new ideas about strength, nationalism, and order. He said Italy needed to rise again, like the Roman Empire once had. His words were angry, proud, and direct. Many listened. In 1919, after the war ended, Mussolini founded the Fasci di Combattimento, or combat leagues. These groups were made up of former soldiers, nationalists, and young men angry about the war's outcome. Italy had fought on the winning side but gained little. The country felt cheated. Unions were striking, peasants were taking land, and the economy was crumbling. Mussolini saw opportunity in the chaos. The fascist squads, later called black shirts, began attacking socialists, breaking up strikes, and burning union offices. They marched through towns with sticks and castor oil, humiliating anyone who got in their way. By 1922, the fascist movement had grown into a real political force. Thousands of blackshirts marched to Rome in what Mussolini called a revolution. But the truth is, there was no real battle. The army didn't resist. The king, Victor Emmanuel III, feared civil war and hoped Mussolini could restore order. So instead of stopping him, he invited Mussolini to form a government. It was a legal appointment, but not an election. That was how Mussolini took power, not with votes, not with revolution, but with fear, force, and the silent approval of those who thought they could control him. Mussolini's rule: fear, surveillance, and propaganda. By 1924, Mussolini's grip on Italy had tightened, but not yet fully locked in. Then came a turning point, one that silenced many and scared the rest. That summer, a member of parliament named Giacomo Matteotti stood up and accused the fascists of cheating during the election. He said there had been violence, threats, and fraud. A few days later, Matteotti disappeared. His body was found weeks later, beaten and buried in a shallow grave. The public was shocked. The press exploded. Many believed Mussolini had ordered the hit, or at least allowed it. For a brief moment, his rule looked shaky. Protests broke out. Opposition leaders walked out of parliament, but Mussolini waited. He didn't apologize. He didn't step down. Instead, in January 1925, he gave a bold speech. He took full responsibility, not for the murder, but for the regime's direction. That speech was the moment the dictatorship became official. After that, dissent was no longer tolerated. Within the next few years, Mussolini banned all political parties except his own. The press was censored. Union offices were shut down. Strikes became illegal. Libraries removed books. The regime arrested those who resisted and sent them to internal exile, remote islands, or far-off villages where they had no contact with the outside world. Many never came back. Others were just forgotten. Italy became a country where only one voice was allowed: Mussolini's. To enforce this silence, he created a secret police force called the overthrown. Its agents blended in, listened in cafes, followed suspects, tapped phones. They made lists, took notes, and waited. At night, they arrested people without warning. Families woke up to find loved ones gone, with no idea where they were taken or why. Overthrown wasn't just about crime. It was about fear. Mussolini used it to keep the country in check. At the same time, the regime launched a full campaign of propaganda. Schools were told what to teach. Children learned chants praising Il Duce. Radios played speeches. Films opened with newsreels showing Mussolini riding horses, inspecting wheat, flying planes. Even coins bore his image. He was everywhere. To many Italians, he became not just a man, but a symbol of strength, of order, of Italy's return to greatness. But beneath the parades and slogans was a different truth. Dissent was punished. Jewish communities were stripped of rights. Intellectuals vanished. And millions lived in quiet fear, watching what they said, who they spoke to, and where they went. The fall begins. July 1943, Palace Intrigue. By the summer of 1943, the war had turned against Italy. Bombs fell on Rome. Sicily was lost to the Allies. The people were angry. Soldiers were dying. Food was scarce. Even Mussolini seemed tired. His speeches were slower, his presence less confident. In the palace, something was shifting. Behind closed doors, the men who once swore loyalty began to whisper. On July 24, 1943, Mussolini called a late-night meeting of the Grand Council of Fascism. It was supposed to show strength. Instead, it showed cracks. Dino Grandi, one of his oldest allies, stood and proposed something no one had dared before: a motion to strip Mussolini of his powers. It wasn't framed as an attack. Grandi used careful words. He spoke of the king, of the army, of saving Italy. But the message was clear. Mussolini had to go. One by one, others spoke. Some hesitated, some didn't. Galeazzo Ciano, Mussolini's own son-in-law, voted in favor of the motion. So did Giuseppe Bottai, the intellectual of the regime. The vote passed, 19-7. Mussolini didn't fight back. He didn't shout. He just sat there. The meeting ended in silence. The next day, July 25th, Mussolini went to meet King Victor Emmanuel III at Via Savoia, expecting support. Instead, the king calmly told him he was being replaced. General Pietro Badoglio would become prime minister. The fascist party was to be dissolved. Before Mussolini could respond, the Carabinieri stepped forward. He was under arrest, no trial, no headline, just a quiet escort into a waiting ambulance. That evening, the news spread across Italy. people came out into the streets. They tore down fascist symbols, statues, flags, portraits, anything with Mussolini's face on it were destroyed. Some wept with joy, others stayed cautious, unsure what would come next. But Mussolini was gone. After 2 decades of total power, he had fallen in a single day, with a single vote. No bullets, no mobs, just a room full of former allies who decided he was finished. They had once cheered him on stage. Now they watched him walk out the back door, escorted by guards. The Duca who once ruled through fear had been removed without a fight. Not by enemies, but by his own circle, behind bars, Mussolini's captivity. Mussolini didn't know where he was going. After his arrest on July 25, 1943, the Carabinieri drove him away from Rome under strict secrecy. They didn't tell him the destination. Not even the guards knew. The Allies were advancing from the south, and German troops still occupied much of the north. The Italian government feared a Nazi rescue attempt. Mussolini was a valuable prisoner, and keeping him hidden became a matter of national strategy. His first stop was the island of Ponza, off the coast of Lazio. It was small, quiet, isolated, the perfect place to disappear someone. He stayed there only a few days before being transferred again, this time to La Maddalena, a naval base on an island near Sardinia. The new location offered tighter security. He was guarded day and night, cut off from the outside world. His health was fading, and he complained of stomach problems and fatigue. But the worst part for him wasn't the physical discomfort. It was the silence. No radio, no newspapers, no orders to give. Just long days with nothing but his own thoughts. Then came the final transfer. In early September, Mussolini was flown to the Apennine Mountains and taken to the Hotel Campo Imperatore, a stone lodge high up in Gran Sasso. The building was surrounded by cliffs. There was only one road in and out, and it was blocked by rockfalls. The Italian government believed no one could reach him there. He was alone, guarded by loyal soldiers, far from the public eye. Meanwhile, Italy was changing. When the news of Mussolini's arrest first broke, people were stunned. There were no speeches announcing it, just quiet whispers at first. But then came action. Crowds tore down fascist emblems, statues were smashed, street signs were replaced, the party headquarters were looted. In Naples, Florence, and Rome, people ripped Mussolini's face off posters and coins. Some cried in relief. Others didn't say much. They had learned to be careful. The newspapers changed overnight. The headlines that once praised Mussolini now avoided his name entirely. His photos disappeared. Stories shifted focus to the king and General Badoglio. Fascism was no longer the law. It had been erased in a matter of days. But Mussolini was still alive, sitting in a cold room above the clouds, unaware that his regime was crumbling faster than he could imagine. A country without a compass. Italy was now technically free of Mussolini, but it didn't feel like freedom. Marshal Pietro Badoglio, the man who replaced him, was a military figure known for loyalty to the crown, not for leading a democracy. He told the public that the war would go on at Germany's side, but behind closed doors, he was doing the opposite. The fascist government was suspended, but many of its officials kept their jobs. The buildings stayed the same. The uniforms stayed the same. Only the slogans changed. The machine kept running, just under a different name. At the same time, Badoglio opened secret talks with the Allies. General Giuseppe Castellano was sent to Lisbon to meet British and American representatives. The goal was to find a way out of the war. Italy had suffered too much: bombed cities, ruined farms, and mounting deaths. But switching sides was risky. The Germans had over 500,000 troops in the country, and Hitler didn't trust the Italians. He had spies everywhere. He could see the betrayal coming. By late August 1943, German High Command had already begun preparing a response. They called it Operation Axe. It was designed to take over Italy in case the Italians defected. German divisions moved quietly into position across the north, especially in areas with key ports, railways, and supply lines. Troops were placed near Rome, Naples, and the Alpine passes. Tanks rolled in under the cover of joint defense, but everyone knew what they were really for. Badoglio, meanwhile, dragged his feet. He feared the Germans would retaliate before the Allies could offer protection. The Allies, especially Eisenhower, grew impatient. They wanted a clear answer. On September 3rd, Italy finally signed the armistice at Captivity in Sicily. But it was kept secret for 5 more days. The country held its breath. Mussolini was still missing from public life, but the world around him was spinning toward collapse. The Germans were preparing for a fight. The Allies were preparing for a landing, and the Italian people, for the most part, were confused and exhausted. They had no clear direction. Their dictator was gone, but their future was still in someone else's hands. The collapse of order, armistice, and chaos. On the evening of September 8, 1943, everything finally snapped. Italy's armistice with the Allies was no longer a secret. Marshal Badoglio went on the radio and gave a short, confusing speech. He confirmed the surrender, but didn't give any orders. There were no instructions for the army, no plan for defense, and no guidance for the population. Just silence and uncertainty. The moment the message aired, panic spread across the country like fire. German forces, already waiting and fully prepared, launched Operation Axe. They moved fast. Within hours, they seized key cities: Rome, Milan, Florence, and dozens more. Train lines were taken. Ports were locked down. Bridges were guarded. Italian troops, stunned and leaderless, didn't know who to fight. Some resisted. Others surrendered. Thousands were captured. Many simply walked away, still in uniform, trying to get home. Some were rounded up and sent to German labor camps. Others were shot. The royal family didn't stay to fight. King Victor Emmanuel III, along with Badoglio and the entire high command, fled Rome and headed south toward Allied-controlled territory. They left in the early morning of September 9th. No announcements, no farewells, no protection left behind. Government buildings were abandoned. Radios went dark. The capital was left to the Germans. With no real government and no central command, Italy fractured overnight. The country split into 2 realities. In the south, the Allies advanced slowly, greeted by some as liberators. In the north, a German-controlled zone emerged, which soon became the base for a resurrected fascist regime led once again by Mussolini. But the center, every city, village, and road in between, became contested ground. Italians began fighting one another. Some joined partisan groups, hiding in the mountains, sabotaging trains, planting explosives, ambushing patrols. Others signed up with the fascist militias, driven by loyalty, fear, or revenge. Families turned against each other. Neighbors were suspected of spying. Retaliation became routine. One attack led to another. If a German soldier was killed, entire villages were burned in response. It wasn't just a war between nations anymore. It was a war between Italians, and Mussolini, though out of public view, was still right at the center of it. His fall hadn't ended the violence. In many ways, it had made it worse. Germany's puppet, the Salò years, 1943 to 1945. On September 12, 1943, just days after Italy's surrender, German commandos carried out a daring rescue operation in the mountains of Abruzzo. Mussolini had been held prisoner at the remote Hotel Campo Imperatore, high up on the Gran Sasso. A team of German paratroopers, led by Otto Skorzeny, landed gliders on the rocky plateau and freed him without firing a shot. Within hours, Mussolini was flown to Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. But what waited for him wasn't triumph. It was a demand. Lead a new fascist state in the north, or vanish forever. By late September, with Nazi backing, Mussolini announced the creation of the Italian Social Republic, also known as the Salò Republic, named after the lakeside town where its offices were based. But it wasn't a true government. It had no real independence. German officers ran the military. German advisors wrote the laws. Mussolini was reduced to a figurehead, a puppet in a state ruled by foreign command. His power had shrunk, but his bitterness grew. He wanted revenge. In January 1944, the Verona trials were held to punish those who had voted against him back in July. Among them was his own son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano. Despite family ties, Mussolini did nothing to save him. Ciano and several others were shot by firing squad. The killings shocked even some fascist loyalists. But Mussolini pressed on. He gave fiery speeches. He talked about rebuilding a pure fascist state. But the reality was grim. Support for him was thin. Most Italians were tired of war, tired of speeches, tired of fascism. The Salò Republic couldn't govern properly. It relied on terror. Black-shirt militias hunted partisans. Civilians were arrested, tortured, or killed for suspicion alone. The Germans carried out mass executions and deportations. Villages were burned. In places like Marzabotto and Sant'Anna di Stazzema, entire communities were wiped out in retaliation for partisan attacks. By late 1944, Mussolini was increasingly isolated. He rarely left his guarded villa. He suffered from health problems, insomnia, stomach pain, deep depression. His speeches no longer inspired fear or loyalty. He wrote long, angry notes to aides, but few listened. Hitler barely answered his messages. The war was turning. Germany was retreating. Allies were moving up the peninsula. Mussolini had become what he feared most, powerless and forgotten. A nation at war with itself. By late 1943, Italy was no longer a unified country. It had become a battleground, not just between the Allies and the Nazis, but between Italians themselves. The North was ruled by Mussolini's puppet regime, backed by German forces. The South, under King Victor Emmanuel III and Prime Minister Badoglio, had joined the Allies. But the real fight was happening in the middle. Mountains, hills, valleys, and towns torn apart by civil war. In this chaos, partisan groups began to grow. Some were communists, others were Catholics or liberals. Many had no political label at all. What united them was their hatred of fascism and their belief that Italy had to be freed. Truly freed. Not just from the Germans, but from everything Mussolini had built. They formed secret brigades, held meetings in barns and forests, and used whatever weapons they could find. They blew up train tracks, ambushed supply convoys, spread leaflets, and rescued prisoners. Some areas, especially in the Apennines and the Po Valley, were even declared liberated zones, places where fascist control had completely broken down. The response from Mussolini's forces was brutal. The Black Brigades, made up of die-hard fascists and often backed by German SS units, launched a wave of terror. They tortured prisoners, burned villages, and shot anyone they suspected of helping the partisans. The massacres at Marzabotto in October 1944 and Sant'Anna di Stazzema in August of the same year were especially horrific. Entire families, including children and the elderly, were murdered. In Rome, after a partisan bombing killed German soldiers on Via Rasella, Nazi troops executed 335 civilians in the Ardeatine caves as revenge. This wasn't just a war of armies. It was a war inside homes. Families were split. Some members supported the resistance. Others joined fascist militias. People were reported by neighbors. Sometimes it was for political reasons. Other times, it was personal revenge disguised as patriotism. Women played key roles in the resistance, smuggling weapons, hiding fugitives, passing messages, but they also paid the price. Many were arrested, raped, or executed. The violence didn't stop at the front lines. It soaked into everyday life. Schools shut down, shops closed, food became scarce, trust disappeared. The Civil War had turned Mussolini's dream of national unity into a nightmare of suspicion, fear, and betrayal. Execution without trial, Mussolini's brutal end. By April 1945, Mussolini's time had run out. The Allies were advancing from the south. The Germans were retreating. Even many of his loyalists had lost faith. The Salò Republic was falling apart, and Mussolini, once seen as the strongman of Italy, was now seen as a puppet. With defeat all but certain, he made a final attempt to escape. On April 25th, he left Milan disguised in a German uniform. His plan was to cross the border into Switzerland, hoping to find safety, or at least time to negotiate. He joined a convoy of retreating German soldiers moving north toward the Alps. Along with him was Clara Petacci, his longtime companion. They stayed close to the trucks and wore helmets and coats to blend in. But at a checkpoint in the village of Dongo, near Lake Como, Italian partisans stopped the convoy. They searched the vehicles and quickly realized something was off. In one of the trucks, hidden among the Germans, they found Mussolini. He did not resist. The man who once marched thousands into Rome had been found hiding, silent and tired. The news spread fast. The partisans contacted their commanders. There was debate about what to do with him, whether to send him to trial, to hand him over to the Allies, or to execute him immediately. In the end, the decision was made. On April 28, 1945, two partisans, Walter Audicio and Aldo Lampredi, took Mussolini and Petacci to a quiet spot in the village of Giulino di Mezzegra. There, near a farmhouse wall, they were both shot. Their bodies were loaded into a van and taken to Milan. On the morning of April 29th, the corpses were dumped in Piazzale Loreto, a public square where, just a year earlier, fascists had executed 15 partisans. This time, it was Mussolini's body that hung from a metal beam, upside down, alongside Petacci and other fascist officials. Crowds gathered. Some cheered. Others spat. A few wept. Many just stared. That moment was the final image of Mussolini's rule. Not a grand farewell, not a courtroom trial, just two bullet-riddled bodies hanging in the open air. For a man who built a dictatorship on theater and power, his ending came not with a speech, but in silence. The deuce never really left. After Mussolini's death, Italy was left to clean up the ruins, not just of buildings, but of ideas. The war ended, the monarchy collapsed, and the country became a republic in 1946. But the man who once ruled Italy with an iron grip didn't vanish so easily. His body was gone, but his shadow stayed. That same year, a group of former fascists founded the Italian Social Movement, or MSI. It was small at first, but its message was loud. It tried to reshape Mussolini's image, not as a tyrant, but as a misunderstood patriot. They called him betrayed, not defeated. A hero, not a monster. Then came the amnesty. Palmiro Togliatti, justice minister and a communist, signed a sweeping law that freed many ex-fascists. The goal was peace, healing, and moving forward. But it also meant that many who had supported or enforced Mussolini's rule faced no real punishment. They returned to jobs in government, the police, even education. Some saw it as practical. Others saw it as a betrayal of justice. Meanwhile, Mussolini's hometown of Predappio became more than a place. It became a symbol. His remains were buried there in 1957, and slowly the town turned into a pilgrimage site. Every year, on the anniversary of his birth and death, people came. Some out of curiosity, others out of loyalty. Flags waved, old chants returned. The regime was dead, but for many, the memory lived on. The Italian Constitution of 1948 tried to draw a clear line. It banned the reorganization of the fascist party. It protected freedoms Mussolini had once crushed. It declared that Italy was anti-fascist at its core. But paper laws don't erase everything. Far-right symbols still appeared. Some politicians used old slogans. Mussolini's name was whispered, debated, shouted, and sometimes defended in public. In schools, students learned about him through books. But outside classrooms, his figure showed up in film, music, and even fashion. He was mocked, feared, or admired, depending on who was watching. Political parties argued about how to handle his memory. Some wanted silence. Others wanted education. But no one ignored it. Mussolini had been executed, his regime dismantled, his empire failed. Yet in arguments, rallies, and headlines, he kept coming back. Legacy of a dictator. Warning from the past. Benito Mussolini did not rise to power with votes. He rose with fear, fists, and help from the powerful. His rule lasted over 2 decades, reshaping Italy into something cold and quiet in voice. One party. One image on walls, radios, coins, and minds. He silenced the press. He jailed or killed those who spoke out. He promised greatness but delivered war, ruin, and division. What began with marches and songs ended with firing squads and bodies hung in a square. His fall was not noble. It was not heroic. It was messy, sudden, and full of betrayal. The same people who once cheered him turned away. The same party that lifted him up cast him out. His own son-in-law voted against him. There was no courtroom, no final words. He was captured, shot, and left in the open for all to see, stripped of myth, reduced to flesh. And yet, the memory did not disappear. Italy became a republic, passed laws, changed its flag, rewrote its future. But the past clung tightly. Mussolini's legacy was not buried with him in Predappio. It stayed in headlines, debates, street chants, and shadowy corners of politics. It raised questions that never quite found answers. How did he rise so fast? Why did so many follow? Could it happen again? His story is not just history. It is a warning, a reminder of what power looks like when it goes unchecked, of how fast freedom can vanish when one man becomes the nation.